Sana had never thought of herself as someone who would work in a coffee shop. She was a university student, usually busy with her classes, assignments, and the extra reading she liked to do on her own. Her evenings were often spent in the library, tucked away in a quiet corner with her laptop open, typing notes or highlighting chapters in thick textbooks. Her best friend, Aisha, however, lived a different kind of routine. Aisha worked part-time at a cozy but very busy coffee shop in the heart of the city. She was quick on her feet, always smiling at customers, and often came home with funny little stories about the people she met at work. One rainy evening, just when Sana had spread her books across her desk, her phone buzzed. It was Aisha. The tone of her voice was urgent and tired when Sana picked up. She explained that she had caught a fever and couldn't make it to her evening shift. Her manager was strict about schedules, and she was terrified of losing her job if she didn't find someone to cover for her. Sana hesitated at first. She had never worked behind a counter before, and the thought of operating coffee machines or dealing with strangers made her a little nervous. She had seen how fast-paced and hectic Aisha's workplace could get, especially in the evenings when people stopped by for their last cup of energy before heading home. But when Aisha pleaded, reminding her of all the times she had supported Sana, it became impossible to say no. "All you have to do is show up, smile, and try not to burn the milk," Aisha joked weakly before hanging up, her voice hoarse but grateful. Sana sighed, put away her books, and got dressed in simple clothes that she thought would be appropriate for cafe work. As she tied her hair back and glanced at herself in the mirror, she laughed nervously. This wasn't her world, but maybe she could manage for just one night. When she reached the coffee shop, the warm glow of its lights spilled onto the wet street. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and a wave of sound and smell hit her at once: the chatter of customers, the grinding of beans, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee filling the air. Behind the counter, two employees rushed around, calling out orders, pouring shots of espresso, and steaming milk in shiny metal pitchers. One of them, a cheerful young man with curly hair named Bilal, looked up and recognized her. Aisha had already told him that Sana would be covering. He quickly handed her an apron and gave her a crash course in what to do. "You don't need to know everything," he assured her. "Just take orders, smile, and if you get confused, call me." Sana nodded, slipping the apron over her head. She felt like she was stepping onto a stage without a script. The line of customers stretched almost to the door, people tapping their feet and checking their watches impatiently. She took her first order, a latte with extra foam, and clumsily tried to enter it into the register. Her fingers shook slightly, and she almost pressed the wrong button. The customer, a woman in a business suit, gave her a sharp look, but Sana smiled apologetically and finally got it right. With every order, she tried to stay calm. Some customers were friendly, joking about the weather or complimenting the cafe's pastries, while others were curt, speaking quickly and moving aside. Sana noticed how different people could be when they were in a hurry. It was almost like the cafe was a stage where little slices of life played out: students on study breaks, couples sharing desserts, office workers grabbing coffee to keep them awake. At one point, a group of students from her university walked in, laughing loudly. Sana quickly ducked her head, hoping they wouldn't notice her. She wasn't embarrassed exactly, but she didn't want to explain why she was suddenly working behind the counter. The evening wore on, and Sana found herself learning little tricks: how to carry 2 cups at once without spilling, how to remember complicated drink orders by repeating them in her head, how to offer a kind word even when she felt flustered. She began to understand why Aisha always had stories. Every person who walked in seemed to bring their own mood, their own tiny piece of drama. But even as she grew more comfortable, she couldn't shake off her nervousness completely. She worried about making a mistake, about dropping something or angering a customer. At the same time, a small part of her felt proud for even being there. She had stepped into her friend's shoes, quite literally, and was trying her best to handle the pressure. During a short break, she leaned against the counter, sipping water. Her feet already ached, and her apron was splattered with little spots of milk and coffee. Bilal noticed her tired expression and laughed. "You're doing fine," he said. "Trust me, the first shift is always the hardest. After this, nothing will scare you." Sana smiled faintly. She wasn't sure if she'd ever want to do this again, but there was a strange thrill in being part of the chaos, as though she were catching a glimpse of a world she never paid attention to before. By the time she returned to the counter, the line had thickened again. A group of office workers in neat suits came in, talking about meetings and deadlines. Their voices filled the room as Sana hurried to take their orders. She could feel the pressure mounting again. She reminded herself that this was only for a few hours, only until closing time. She didn't know that her night was about to take a turn she would never forget. What started as a simple favor for a sick friend was slowly leading her toward an unexpected meeting, one that would change her path in ways she could not yet imagine. The evening grew busier by the minute. The rain outside had stopped, but the streets were still wet, and the smell of damp air drifted in every time the cafe door opened. People kept pouring in, shaking raindrops off their umbrellas and coats. The little bell above the door jingled almost non-stop, and the cafe felt alive with chatter, the clinking of cups, and the constant hum of machines. Sana tightened her apron and tried her best to keep up with the flow. She had already taken dozens of orders, and though she was far from perfect, she was learning quickly. Still, her nerves stayed with her, like a small weight pressing on her shoulders. Every new customer felt like a test. A man in a dark suit stood near the back of the line, tall and composed, carrying a leather briefcase. His expression was unreadable as he waited, one hand resting in his pocket, the other lightly gripping the handle of his case. He looked like someone important, but Sana was too busy to notice him in detail at that moment. "Medium cappuccino, extra hot, no sugar," one customer ordered. "Large mocha, with whipped cream," said another. Sana repeated each order back carefully, pressing buttons on the register with shaky hands. She tried to sound confident, though inside she felt clumsy. Then came the moment she would never forget. The tall man in the suit finally stepped forward. His voice was deep and steady when he placed his order: "1 black coffee, no milk, no sugar." Simple enough, Sana thought. She quickly grabbed a paper cup and moved toward the coffee machine. But the rush around her made everything blur together, voices calling out, milk steaming, someone asking for extra napkins. She tried to balance the cup while also answering another customer's quick question. Her hand trembled just slightly as she turned back toward the counter. And then, it happened. The cup slipped. A sudden jerk of her hand sent hot coffee spilling forward. Before she could catch it, the dark liquid splashed onto the man's crisp white shirt and suit jacket. The sound of his brief gasp cut through the chatter of the cafe, and Sana's heart sank. "Oh no, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she blurted out, grabbing a handful of napkins in panic. She rushed around the counter, offering them to him with trembling hands. Her face burned with embarrassment, and she felt every pair of eyes in the cafe turn toward them. The man stepped back slightly, dabbing at his jacket with surprising calm. For a moment, Sana braced herself for anger. She had seen how some customers snapped at small mistakes. Spilling coffee on someone's expensive suit was far more than a small mistake. She expected sharp words, maybe even demands to call the manager. But instead, the man looked at her and smiled faintly. "It's all right," he said in a calm tone. "Accidents happen." His words stunned her. She blinked at him, still holding napkins out as if expecting him to change his mind any second. I really didn't mean I'll pay for the cleaning, I can." He shook his head gently. "Don't worry. Just assured. I'll survive." The kindness in his voice only made Sana's cheeks grow hotter. She wanted to sink into the floor. Around her, customers had started whispering, some amused, some sympathetic. Bilal rushed over, his eyes wide. "What happened?" he asked, glancing at the spilled coffee on the man's clothes. "I dropped it on him," Sana admitted quickly, her voice shaking. Bilal looked horrified, but the man waved it off again. "Really, it's fine. She doesn't need to be so worried." The situation could have ended there, but something about the man's calm reaction made Sana linger. She couldn't help but notice how different he was from the impatient customers she had dealt with earlier. Most people would have complained loudly, yet here he stood, brushing it off as if it were nothing. She returned behind the counter, her hands still trembling, and quickly prepared another black coffee for him. This time, she held the cup with both hands as though it were a fragile treasure, carefully placing it on the counter. "Here's your coffee, sir. No charge." He accepted it, giving her a look that was both kind and thoughtful. "Thank you. You're new here, aren't you?" Sana hesitated, then nodded. "I'm just covering for a friend tonight. She wasn't feeling well." "Ah," he said, as if that explained everything. He took a slow sip of the coffee, then added, "You're doing all right. It's not easy dealing with so many people at once." His words were simple, but they lifted some of the weight off her shoulders. She had been expecting criticism, but instead she was being encouraged. That surprised her more than the spill itself. As the man moved to a corner table, Sana tried to return to her work, but her mind kept replaying the moment. The look on his face when the coffee spilled, the way he didn't shout, the way he seemed to take it all in stride. Something about him didn't match the usual hurried, impatient cafe customer. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was different. For the next half hour, she served more drinks, wiped down counters, and tried to focus on her tasks. But she kept glancing at the man in the suit, who now sat quietly, sipping his coffee while typing on a sleek laptop. Every now and then, his eyes drifted toward the counter, and Sana quickly looked away, embarrassed all over again. Bilal leaned closer to her at one point and whispered, "You're lucky he didn't get angry. Most people would have demanded to speak to the manager right away. I've seen customers flip tables for less." "I know," Sana whispered back, biting her lip. "I don't know how he stayed so calm." Bilal shrugged. "Maybe he's just different. Or maybe he's having a good day." Sana nodded, though she wasn't convinced. She sensed there was more to this man than a good mood. Her shift continued, the cafe buzzing with life, but the memory of the accident stayed fresh. She knew she wouldn't forget it anytime soon. What she didn't know was that this clumsy mistake would end up shaping the rest of her evening, and perhaps much more of her life than she could ever imagine. Sana tried to focus on the customers in front of her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the tall man in the suit sitting in the corner. Every time she looked up from the counter, she could see him typing on his laptop, sipping the black coffee she had remade for him after the spill. His calmness still surprised her. The whole situation should have been much worse, yet he had smiled, reassured her, and acted as though nothing serious had happened. She felt both grateful and embarrassed. Part of her wished he would leave soon so she could stop feeling self-conscious. But another part of her was curious. Who was he? Why had he reacted so kindly when many other customers would have demanded free drinks, apologies, and maybe even reported her mistake to the manager? The cafe remained busy. People came and went, filling the air with chatter and the sounds of clinking cups. Sana fell into a rhythm, taking orders, handling money, wiping counters. Yet her nervousness had not completely left. Every so often, she caught the man watching the room quietly, as though he were observing everything and everyone, not just drinking coffee. After nearly an hour, the crowd thinned slightly. A few customers lingered at tables with their laptops, but the long line at the counter had shortened. Sana finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. Her feet hurt, and her arms ached from carrying trays and cups, but she felt a tiny sense of accomplishment. Maybe she could handle this after all. Just as she was thinking this, the man in the suit stood up and walked toward the counter again. Sana's heart skipped. She quickly straightened her apron, worried that he might be coming to complain after all. Instead, he placed his empty cup gently on the counter and smiled. "Could I have another black coffee?" Sana nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." She turned to prepare it, this time holding the cup as if it were the most important object in the world. She double-checked every step and carefully handed it to him. "Here you go, sir." "Thank you," he said warmly. Then, instead of returning to his table, he leaned slightly on the counter. "You said earlier you're only covering for your friend tonight." Sana froze for a second, then nodded. "Yes. My friend Aisha works here. She wasn't feeling well, so I came instead." "Interesting," he replied. "So, you don't usually work in cafes?" Sana gave a small laugh. "Not at all. I'm actually a student. I study business at the university." His eyebrows lifted slightly, as if something about that detail caught his attention. "Business, you say? That explains why you seemed so curious about everything happening here. You've been observing the customers while working, haven't you?" Sana blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" He smiled knowingly. "I could see it. You were watching people, not just their orders. You notice how they behave, how they react, how different each person can be in the same space. That's something many people overlook." His words made her feel unexpectedly seen. She had always been curious about people, often wondering about their stories when she sat in the library or rode the bus. But hearing a stranger notice it so clearly made her cheeks warm again. "I guess I do notice things," she admitted softly. "I just didn't want to mess up too badly tonight. I was so nervous." "You handled the spill well," he said calmly, as if it were nothing. "You apologized quickly, tried to fix it, and didn't panic too much. That's what matters in customer service, how you respond, not just what you do." Sana was stunned. She had expected criticism, not encouragement. The fact that this man had taken the time to give her thoughtful feedback amazed her. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. "I thought I ruined your evening." "On the contrary," he said with a small smile. "It made the evening more memorable. Besides, it reminded me of my own first job. I spilled tea on a customer once. I thought I would be fired on the spot." Sana's eyes widened. "Really? You did?" "Of course," he replied, chuckling softly. "Everyone makes mistakes. The real lesson is how you recover from them." There was a pause as Sana absorbed his words. She found herself curious about him in return. He didn't speak like an ordinary customer. His tone carried authority, but also warmth. He seemed like someone who had seen a lot and learned a lot, yet remained approachable. Before she could stop herself, she asked, "So, what do you do?" The man looked at her thoughtfully, as though deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "I work in business too. Let's just say I manage a company." Sana nodded politely, not pressing further. She assumed he was probably some kind of manager or executive. It made sense, his suit, his briefcase, his calm demeanor. Still, she had no idea just how important he really was. As they spoke, a few more customers entered, and Sana had to turn her attention back to work. But something about their brief conversation stayed with her. His kindness, his encouragement, his interest in her studies, it was different from anything she expected in such a setting. Later, when the cafe grew quiet again, she glanced at his table. He was still there, sipping his second coffee, typing away on his laptop. For a moment, their eyes met across the room. He gave a small nod, as if to reassure her once more, before returning to his work. Sana felt an unexpected sense of calm. The earlier embarrassment no longer weighed as heavily on her. Instead, she felt strangely motivated, as though she had just received a lesson she hadn't known she needed. By the time her shift neared its end, she was exhausted but also strangely energized. She had survived the chaos, handled the worst mistake she could imagine, and even had a meaningful conversation with a stranger who didn't treat her like just another server. What Sana didn't know, of course, was that this man was no ordinary customer. He was someone far more significant than she realized. But that discovery would come later. For now, she was simply grateful that her worst mistake had led to an unexpected connection, one that left her curious and hopeful as she cleaned up the counter and prepared to close the shop. The clock above the counter ticked past 9. The cafe was quieter now, with only a handful of customers left scattered at the tables. The rush that had kept Sana on her toes for hours had finally slowed, giving her a chance to breathe. She wiped down the counter slowly, glancing around the shop with tired eyes. Her shift had been full of small disasters and tiny victories, but the memory of spilling coffee on the man in the suit still hovered in her mind. She thought he had already left, but when she looked toward the corner, she saw him still there, typing steadily on his laptop. His focus was sharp, and every now and then, he paused to sip his coffee, as though nothing in the world could disturb his calm. Bilal leaned against the counter beside her. "You know who that is, right?" he whispered suddenly, tilting his chin toward the man. Sana frowned, confused. "Who?" Bilal's eyes widened. "That man. The one you spilled coffee on earlier. You seriously don't know?" Sana shook her head slowly. "No." "Why? Is he someone famous?" Bilal let out a low laugh, almost disbelieving. "That's Kamal Saeed, the CEO of Vertex Technologies. You've heard of them, haven't you?" The name hit Sana like a splash of cold water. Of course she had heard of Vertex Technologies. It was one of the fastest growing companies in the country, always in the news for its new products, bold strategies, and innovative ideas. She had even read about it in her business textbooks. Their CEO, Kamal Saeed, was known as a visionary leader, someone respected not only for his success but for his unique approach to business. Sana's eyes widened in shock. "That's him." "Yes." Bilal whispered urgently, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "He comes here sometimes. People say he likes quiet places to think. But he's not just rich, he's influential. Whole articles get written about his speeches. He's a big deal." Sana's mind spun. She stared at the man in the corner, seeing him in a completely new light. The calm, kind customer she had spoken to casually was not just a businessman, he was the businessman, a CEO she had unknowingly spilled coffee on. Her stomach flipped with embarrassment. She replayed their conversation in her head. She had told him she was just covering for her friend, that she was a student studying business. She had even asked him what he did, without realizing the weight of the question. He hadn't lied, but he had kept it vague. Now she understood why. "What if he tells the manager?" she whispered anxiously. "What if he complains about me later?" Bilal shook his head firmly. "Trust me, he won't. If he wanted to, he would have already. Besides, he's not that kind of person. I've seen him before, he's humble. Doesn't act like a big boss." Still, Sana couldn't shake her nerves. She felt her cheeks heat again, thinking about how casually she had spoken to him, not realizing who he really was. A part of her wished she had stayed quiet, but another part felt strangely honored. She had spilled coffee on a CEO and survived. Not only that, he had encouraged her. A little while later, the man, Mr. Kamal, she now realized, closed his laptop and stood. He picked up his briefcase, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked toward the counter. Sana's heart pounded as he approached, every step making her more aware of who he was. When he reached the counter, he placed his empty cup down gently. "Thank you for the coffee," he said with his usual calmness. "You're welcome," Sana managed to reply, her voice softer than before. He studied her face for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You did well tonight. Even when things went wrong, you handled them with honesty. That's rare." Sana swallowed nervously, unsure what to say. She wanted to apologize again, to explain that she hadn't known who he was, but the words stuck in her throat. Just as he was about to turn away, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. He slid it across the counter toward her. "If you're serious about business, get in touch. We're always looking for people with sincerity and courage. Don't let tonight make you doubt yourself." Sana stared at the card in disbelief. His name, Kamal Saeed, was printed in bold letters above his title: Chief Executive Officer, Vertex Technologies. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. She picked it up carefully, as though it were too important to touch carelessly. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Say you'll think about it," he replied kindly. "That's enough." With that, he gave a polite nod and walked toward the door. The bell jingled softly as he stepped out into the night, disappearing into the quiet street. For a moment, Sana stood frozen, the business card still clutched in her hand. The world around her seemed to blur: the hum of the machines, the faint chatter of the remaining customers, even Bilal calling her name. All she could focus on was the fact that she had just been offered an opportunity by a man she had embarrassed herself in front of only hours earlier. Bilal leaned over, grinning. "Do you realize what just happened? He gave you his card. That's like being handed a golden ticket." Sana shook her head slowly, still stunned. "Why me? I mean, I spilled coffee on him." "Exactly," Bilal said. "And he saw how you handled it? Maybe that's why. You didn't fake anything. You were real." Sana thought about that for a long moment. Maybe Bilal was right. Maybe her clumsy mistake had shown Mr. Kamal something she hadn't intended to show: her sincerity, her willingness to admit faults, her ability to keep going despite embarrassment. As the night drew to a close and the cafe prepared to shut down, Sana tucked the business card safely into her bag. Her heart still raced with disbelief, but a tiny spark of hope had begun to grow inside her. What if this was more than just a coincidence? What if one small accident had opened a door she never thought possible? She didn't know yet what would come of it, but one thing was clear: her life had just shifted in a direction she had never expected. The next few days after the coffee shop shift felt unreal for Sana. Every time she opened her bag and caught sight of the sleek business card, her heart beat faster. The name printed on it, Kamal Saeed, CEO of Vertex Technologies, seemed too big, too far from her ordinary student life. She wondered if she had imagined the entire thing: that she had not actually spilled coffee on a CEO, spoken to him so casually, and then received a personal invitation to reach out. She showed the card to Aisha, who had recovered from her fever. Aisha's eyes widened in shock. "You're telling me you spilled coffee on Kamal Saeed, and instead of getting angry, he gave you his card? Sana, do you realize how lucky you are? People dream of meeting him, let alone being noticed by him." Sana laughed nervously, still unsure how to process it. "It doesn't feel real. What if he just gave it to me out of politeness? What if he doesn't even remember me?" Aisha shook her head firmly. "No. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who does things for no reason. If he gave you his card, it means he saw something in you. You should at least try to contact him." For days, Sana debated with herself. She drafted emails in her head but never typed them. She rehearsed phone calls in front of the mirror, but her nerves always stopped her. What if she embarrassed herself again? What if she wasn't good enough? But the thought of letting such an opportunity slip away felt even worse. Finally, one quiet evening, she sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and typed a simple email. She thanked him for his kindness at the cafe, introduced herself properly as a business student, and asked if she could apply for an internship at Vertex Technologies. Her finger hovered over the send button for a long time before she finally clicked it. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a reply. It was from Mr. Kamal himself. "Dear Sana, I remember you well. I appreciate your honesty and courage. If you are interested in an internship, please contact our HR department with this reference. Best regards, Kamal Saeed." Her hands trembled as she read the message. She reread it 3 times just to be sure. It was real. He remembered her. And he was giving her a chance. Within a week, Sana found herself sitting in the sleek lobby of Vertex Technologies. The tall glass building towered above her, its modern design gleaming in the sunlight. Inside, everything felt polished and professional, employees walking briskly with laptops, conversations about projects and deadlines filling the air. She clutched her bag tightly, her nerves bubbling up again. The internship interview wasn't easy. She was asked about her studies, her goals, and even how she handled stressful situations. Sana decided to be completely honest, just as Mr. Kamal had encouraged her. She spoke about the night at the cafe, about the spill, and how she had learned that mistakes can become lessons if handled with sincerity. The interview panel exchanged curious glances but nodded with interest. Her story wasn't polished like a textbook answer, but it was real. A few days later, she received the call she had been accepted. Her internship at Vertex Technologies began soon after. The first day, she walked into the office filled with both excitement and fear. Everything felt new and intimidating, but she remembered Mr. Kamal's words, "It's not about being perfect, it's about how you recover and keep going." Sana threw herself into the work. She observed meetings, took careful notes, and asked questions whenever she could. She was eager to learn, and though she made small mistakes along the way, she never forgot to own up to them and improve. Her supervisors noticed her dedication. Slowly, she grew more confident, contributing ideas and building strong connections with her team. One afternoon, while working on a project, she was unexpectedly called to a meeting. To her surprise, Mr. Kamal himself was there. He recognized her instantly and gave her a small nod. "How are you finding the internship?" he asked after the meeting ended. "It's been challenging," Sana admitted honestly, "but I'm learning more than I ever expected. Thank you for giving me this chance." Mr. Kamal smiled. "You earned it? Do you know why I gave you my card that night?" Sana shook her head. "Because in that cafe, you showed something important," he said thoughtfully. "You made a mistake, yes, but you didn't hide from it. You faced it directly, apologized sincerely, and kept going. That's what leadership is: owning up, learning, and moving forward. Many people with perfect grades fail at that. But you showed it naturally." His words sank deep into her heart. For the first time, Sana truly believed she might have something valuable to offer. Months passed, and Sana continued to grow in her internship. She gained skills, confidence, and a deeper understanding of how businesses worked in the real world. But more than that, she learned lessons about humility, perseverance, and sincerity, lessons that no classroom could fully teach. Looking back, she often thought about that rainy evening at the cafe. She had only agreed to cover Aisha's shift out of friendship. She had been nervous, clumsy, and unsure of herself. She had spilled coffee on the most important customer she could ever imagine. Yet that mistake, instead of ending badly, had opened a door to opportunities she never thought possible. One evening, as she sat at her desk after finishing her internship tasks, she pulled out her bag and looked at the business card again. It was slightly worn now, edges softened from being carried around, but it still reminded her of where her journey had started. Sana smiled to herself. Life had a strange way of surprising people. Sometimes the smallest accidents could turn into the biggest turning points. Sometimes a single moment of sincerity could lead to a path no one could plan. For Sana, that path had begun with a spilled cup of coffee, and it had led her toward a future brighter than she had ever dreamed.